It's been 65 years since the end of the First World War. Those veterans who will participate in Remembrance Day ceremonies this weekend will once again remember their fallen comrades. And some will ask, what did I fight for? In just a moment, how a war historian and two veterans from Moose Jaw's Suicide Battalion deal with that question.
Well, the 46th was one of 260 battalions that the Canadian government raised for service. They had never planned anything on that scale, but that's how it worked out. And they raised them willy-nilly all over the countryside, and the ones from Moose Jaw just happened to draw the number, the 46th. And because of their situation, they were the South Saskatchewans.
James L. McWilliams, war historian and school teacher in Moose Jaw, spent 4 years gathering material on the 46th, and then wrote the book, The Suicide Battalion.
I enlisted February the 3rd, 1916. Actually, I came in right after New Year's to Moose Jaw to enlist. And the first time I tried to enlist was in the 128th Battalion of recruiting year then. I was turned down, rejected not being physically fit.
What was wrong?
Well, I had a flat foot, so they told me.
One flat foot?
One flat foot.
How did that happen?
Well, it happened with a horse stepping on it when I was quite small.
So how come they accepted you eventually?
Well, I think that very shortly afterwards they got so they weren't quite so fussy, we might say.
Private D.R. Bob Stevenson, winner of the Medal of Honor for bravery at Amiens, wounded at Cambrai, met and married a girl in England, became a farmer near Wood Mountain, then a CPR engineer in Moose Jaw, where he retired.
I think there was a stronger feeling of patriotism in the country then, much more so than there is today. Everyone had seemed to have a, I don't know, just what you would say, a respect, a pride in, I guess, in the country, in the empire, and if anything was going to hurt the empire, well, you were going to do your utmost to defend it.
There were young men from all over. Some were unemployed, wanted something to do for the winter. Some were looking for adventure. I know of two who thought it'd be a great chance to visit England. A lot of them just were looking for adventure, but there were some who were patriots, some of the older men particularly, who felt it was the thing to do for the empire. It was later in the war that they started thinking of Canada, but understandably there were quite a few who were very young and lied about their age. They said they were 16 to get in. There were also some who were surprisingly old. I know of one, a really good piper, and the 46 had a pretty good pipe band, so they were keen to get him, but only trouble was he was 59 years old, he had white hair, and he'd already served 26 years in the British Army. So he dyed his hair and put shoe polish in his mustache, I understand, and was signed on. Stayed with him for the whole war, too. When the battalion left quite early in the morning, there were enormous crowds out in the street. I mean, most people wouldn't normally be up, and they were out in the street cheering them when they left, and bands played and so forth.
Goodbye, goodbye, wipe the tear, baby dear, from your eye. Though it's hard to part, I know, but I'll be tickled to death to go. Don't cry, don't sigh, there's a silver lining in the sky. Bonsoir, old thing, cheerio, chin chin, now prove toodaloo, goodbye. Bonsoir, old thing, cheerio, chin chin, now
Well, there was times when it was very gloomy and gloomy, and other times you was quite happy.
What could possibly make you happy in the trenches?
Well, maybe you got your shirt cleaned. Maybe they give you a clean shirt. Anything like that, you know, sure go a long way to help you out.
What about letters from home and to home? Were you able to receive letters?
Oh, yes, and we could write letters. Mostly cards with it already, and you just stroke out what you didn't want. You just didn't know what to write in a letter, for every letter was censored before it left France, so you had to be kind of careful what you wrote. And you couldn't write too much.
Private Fred Gillespie, original member of the 46th, later transferred to the 16th Canadian Scottish, was employed at the Moose Jaw Post Office. In 1967 was the 16th's official representative at the rededication ceremonies at Vimy Ridge. Coincidentally, lives in the same apartment building as Stevenson.
The front line wasn't actually so bad for rats. Reserve, though, in the dugouts was really very bad. The dugouts were all infested bad with rats. The front line was quite often, wintertime especially. I remember the first winter, very, very bad weather. It rained almost continually, and you were up to your knees in mud in there. And we did all get lousy, which was one of the most miserable things I think with trench life. We just couldn't seem to get rid of them.
That's the lice.
Yes.
Tell us about that. How bad was it?
Well, it was really bad. You would hardly believe me if I were to tell you how bad it was.
Try me.
Well, you could open your shirt anytime and pick a louse off.
Oh, the life was bad. Yeah, you didn't know what it was to be when you was in the trenches, to be free from them, but, well, it might have been a good thing, kept your mind somewhere. Oh, the mud was unbearable, but we stuck with it. And sometimes up to your knees, sometimes over top of your boots. But you didn't know what it was from the time you'd go in the line till you'd come out to have dry feet. For that water and mud and stuff would just go through everything.
How did it get the name the Suicide Battalion?
Well, the 46 was one of quite a few battalions who, I guess, could have called themselves that, and maybe most battalions do sooner or later. But they lost 91.5% casualties throughout the war. That's killed, wounded, and missing. Very, very few captured. But I guess they earned their right to that title at Passchendaele. In the morning, when they went over the top, they were 600 strong. And by the way, they'd already lost almost 200 just getting into position. The conditions there were just incredible. Mud everywhere, a sea of mud in an open area where they had no protection. The British High Command had really bungled on that one. Anyway, when they went into action, they had 600, and that evening, they were the spearhead of the Canadian attack, and at the end of the day, they had something like 175 men left. And I guess they always considered themselves as the Suicide Battalion after that.
It seemed to be that everybody had that feeling. You felt that, well, you know, yours was the best platoon in the best company in the best battalion in the best corps in the British Army.
Did you sing many songs?
Yes, they used to, especially when we'd be out behind the lines. They didn't sing in the line, of course, but out behind the lines they used to sing quite a few songs, all right.
Like what? What songs?
Oh, a lot of these old favors like Take Me Back to Blighty and Tipperary, and mostly war songs, yes. Sometimes they get some of the old favorites from back home too, but mostly it was war songs.
Mademoiselle from Armentières, parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armentières, parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armentières, she hadn't been kissed in 40 years. Dicky, parlez-vous. She might have been old for all we knew. Parlez-vous. She might have been old for all we knew. Parlez-vous. She might have been old fought at Waterloo. Dinky-dinky parley-oo.
We're seated in front one of the two crosses that were originally erected by members of the 46th on Vimy Ridge. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, well, for a start, the 46 were one of the very few units that fought in two places at Vimy Ridge, and they're particularly proud of that. They were at Hill 45, and that's what the cross behind us commemorates. And later on in the final climactic part of the battle on capturing the Pimple, which was the high part of the ridge, they took part in both of those, and they lost a lot of casualties, but they were entirely successful. And a few days after the battle, they took wood from a damaged, badly shelled chateau, and they built these two memorial crosses for their own men. And on each side, you'll see the list of the names of the men killed that day at that particular battle. And these sat, along with several other battalions' crosses, on Vimy Ridge for about 13 years, I believe it was, till the Canadian government decided to build the big Vimy Memorial, which is probably the biggest one in Europe.
And how did these come back to Moose Jaw?
Well, they had to dispose of them some way. Nobody wanted to destroy them, and I guess officialdom looked around and realized that the 46 came from Moose Jaw, and they ended up in Moose Jaw.
And here they repose in St. John's Anglican Church in Moose Jaw.
And then they went into the last 100 days, which was the real climax of the war, and of course that's when the Canadian Corps earned its reputation. They were at the Battle of Amiens, and then at the Drocourt-Quéant line, and then crossing the Canal du Nord, they spearheaded that. And then just outside Cambrai, and then there was a pursuit for several days, so they caught up to the Germans, and then the final battle at Valenciennes.
You have a trench map of that particular last battle, do you?
Yes, I do. It was marked out by one of the machine gun officers. It was actually carried that day by this young officer from Moose Jaw, and Lieutenant MacDonald. And you can see on the map the markings that he has put on, the orange and blue and green lines, showing the bounds that the regiment would advance through. And you can see the city and the suburb of Marley. And in the suburb, that's where Sergeant Hugh Cairns of the 46 won his Victoria Cross. It was the last one of the war for the Canadians, and the tremendous battle for him. The battalion was well down in strength now, just a handful of them left. They cut through a large number of German units. I think there was something like 6 German battalions and 6 companies of machine gunners, and this one under-strength battalion chewed them up. And of course Hugh Cairns won the Victoria Cross for a final action at the end of the day.
It was also during that 100-day push that Private Stevenson was awarded a medal for bravery for what he later termed a rather impertinent action he and another comrade took.
A fellow named Tommy Mears was with the grenade section on my right. Came over to talk to me, and he said, let's go up this trench and explore it a little bit. So, without asking anybody's permission or anything, we just decided to do that on our own. Told each of our own sections not to get trigger happy when we were coming back, of course. Well, we hadn't gone too awfully far. I would say probably 400 or 500 yards. We just came around a bend in the trench, and Right in front of us there was a sandbag emplacement and a German sentry sitting on top of that with his rifle across his knees. Tommy had the revolver. He was in front at that time. He shot this sentry. He fell backwards off the parapet, and of course immediately it stirred up a hornet's nest. But I'm 2 or 3 paces forward and throwed my Mills bomb over the parapet, and then we retired. But everything broke loose. I guess the Germans thought they were being attacked, so they started shooting at shadows up and down the line for a mile. Probably every rifle and machine gun opened up. Naturally, we were in the trench where they couldn't really see us, you know, as we retreated back to that. But it seems that the headquarters didn't know where the Germans were any more than we didn't, and they had decided to organize a big raiding party that night to go over and find out where they were. So we found out where they were for them.
This was found by the machine gun officer again, Lieutenant MacDonald, and it was after the battle just outside of Cambrai, and he went into a building which had been used as a German headquarters and machine gun post, and he found this picture of the Golden Wedding and didn't think much of it, and turned it around, and there was this little sign on it which was left by a German soldier who had obviously served some time as a cook in the hotel in Dundee in Scotland.
The message reads, "A hearty welcome from the machine gun boys of the 451st. That's a German regiment. We are pleased not to see you. We didn't want the war, but we hope to see you next year in London. Then I am longing to take a Scotch whiskey. Well, goodbye, keep well off. We are going home and be quiet." And it is signed C.H.N., cook at the Royal British Hotel at Dundee, Bonnie, Scotland, from 1907 to 1911.
Take me back to dear old Vimy. Put me on the train for London town. Take me over there, drop me anywhere. Liverpool, Leeds, or Birmingham, well, I don't care. I should love to see my best girl traveling up again, we soon should be. Oh, Italy, Italy, I-T, hurry me home to Blighty. Blighty is the place for me.
How you gonna keep 'em down on the farm after they've seen Paris? How you gonna keep 'em away from Broadway, dancing around and painting the town? How you gonna keep 'em away from harm? That song is sorry. They'll never want to see a rake or plow, and who the deuce can call him a cow? How you gonna keep 'em down on the farm after they've seen Paris?
When they returned, the hope was that the battalion would be sent to Regina. This is what the authorities had planned. Well, the mayor of Moose Jaw and city council and hundreds of veterans all protested bitterly, and at the last moment it was changed to Moose Jaw, and so the battalion was disbanded here, came home to a great welcome, huge crowds down at the old CPR station. They marched up Main Street and were disbanded in the armories.
What did I fight for? And why was I over there? And 2 brothers stayed over there. And the other 2 came home. Myself and another one. But I often wonder and think, yes, what did we fight for? To make a better Canada. That's what we was always saying, we're going to make a better Canada, but I don't think we did. It's not a better Canada now than it was then. We was all one at that time, but now the country's in a turmoil of, well, they can't get along at all.
Do you think your 2 brothers gave their lives in vain?
I do, yes. They didn't change anything.
Some of them felt that the war had been fought in a rather stupid way and were very bitter about it, and some felt that it was allowed to end too soon, and therefore their sons had to fight a second war against the same enemy years later. But I think they all had the feeling, and I came out of it with the feeling that, well, you just really didn't have much choice.
Is it in fact true to say that nothing was really accomplished by World War I, that all these men were really spent in vain?
Well, you certainly hate to come to that conclusion. I mean, that's sort of shattering, but looking back as a historian, I would almost have to agree with that. I can't see that there were very many achievements made from this.
I was over at Jim McWilliams one time, this was a couple of years ago, and he had some medals on the desk there he was showing me. By the way, they belonged to a 46 man. And he said, I found them in a second-hand store in Vancouver. Oh, that really made me sad. To think that whoever his relatives were, they valued them so lightly that they'd sell them to a second-hand store.